an outline of what we'll cover with the presentation portion of the meeting. First, I will go over the feasibility study. We'll talk about our plan formulation process. We'll share details about the tentatively selected plan for this draft feasibility study. And then we'll go over next steps for this study, what phase comes next. And then at that point, we'll open it up for public comment. So I want to start out tonight's presentation by covering the historic flooding and levee performance. The Little Calumet River levees were built by the Village of Lansing and the City of Calumet City in the early 1980s as an urban flood control project. Major storm events have happened in recent years, most notably in 2008, 2013, and 2018. And the storm of record was that 2008 September storm. The Lansing levee has had one recorded overtopping event, and that was during that September 2008 storm. That happened at the eastern end of the levee near Bernice Road. And in that event, additional flood fighting was also necessary, particularly where the levee and flood wall interface on the west end of the flood wall. After a 2013 Corps of Engineers inspection, the Village of Lansing did complete several repairs to the project, including raising the height at the location of the overtopping on Bernice Road, repairs to the concrete wall, riprap, and gate structures, and they also replaced some of the pump station mechanicals. However, not all of the repairs that were recommended in the 2013 study were completed at that time. For the Calumet City side of the levee, Calumet City levee has not had a recorded overtopping event. However, the reservoir has nearly filled to capacity on a few different occasions, and the Corps has noted active seepage. This is when water is moving through the levee in 2018. So it's also important to note here that the flooding that occurred during the 2008 storm could have actually been much worse than what we witnessed. That's because the levee on the Little Calumet River in Munster, Indiana, just upstream of here, breached, which allowed floodwaters out of the river that would have otherwise come through Lansing and Calumet City. So in fact, if the levee were to overtop again, these are the areas that may experience flooding from the Little Calumet River during a 1% annual chance event. That's also called the 100-year storm. So the darker color blue, or the more deeper the color blue on this map, the deeper the water. So you can see that, in fact, some areas could see up to approximately 2.5 feet of water during that 1% annual event. So to that end, the Village of Lansing and Calumet City really recognize the flood risk that's associated here with the Little Calumet River, and they contacted the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to initiate the study that we're here to talk to you all about this evening. So the federal authority for this study is Section 205 of the Flood Control Act of 1948. And this authority allows the Corps to work with local non-federal sponsors, such as the City of Calumet City and Village of Lansing, on local flood protection projects. Projects implemented under this authority are formulated for structural and non-structural measures to reduce flood risk in accordance with current policies and procedures which are specifically authorized by Congress for the Corps to complete. So here you can see an overview of the project area. There is a levee system, which I'm sure you all are aware of, on the Calumet City side of the river, and then also on the southern side in Lansing. And these two levees function together as a system. So the existing levees on this map are outlined in that lime green, and the existing flood walls, both the concrete and the metal sheet pile walls, are outlined in pink here on this map. And the existing pump stations are the red circles. Lansing, the length of this system in its entirety is about 1.25 miles, and Calumet City is longer. There are two separate segments, and the entire system length is about 2 miles. Before we get into the details, we wanted just to cover the basics of a levee system, just to make sure we all kind of understand the purpose of the project. So here on this diagram, you can see the basic features of the levee. So the levee crest is the highest point of the levee, and it's noted on that diagram. And the levee toe is the base of the levee, and we also have that called out in the images. And essentially the purpose of the levee is to keep the Little Calumet River floodwaters from breaching into the neighborhood and the yards and homes next to the river. And as I mentioned, the current levee system is designed to the 1% annual chance event, or the 100-year flood. So here we just have some pictures of Corps of Engineers levees from across the country, just to give you an idea of what a levee system looks like. So you can see it's free of trees or woody vegetation. It's nicely mowed. This is to ensure that there's good maintenance, and we can see any deficiencies in the levee very easily because we don't have tall grasses or weeds. There aren't any large trees, you'll notice, and I'll cover why that's important in a moment. And then you can also see that where we do have metal sheet pile, that's all intact. It's not rusted through. It looks like it's in good condition. Right, so the next set of slides, we'll talk about why levees do fail. And we do have some pictures as examples. And I just want to be clear, these are not pictures of this current levee system. These are, again, pictures from our nationwide portfolio, just to give you an idea of the types of failures that we may see. The first type of failure is tree failure, and this happens because tree roots can grow into the embankment of the levee, and if one or more of those trees fall, the root systems could pull out a large amount of the embankment, and then this causes a weak point of the levee in which floodwaters may more easily breach. The next type of risk that we see is slope failure. And this essentially happens when an embankment becomes so eroded that the flood wall or the berm just gives way and then slumps into the floodway. And then this is bad because there's less room for flood storage in the river. And then again, it also just creates that weakened point where floodwaters could then breach behind the levee. There's also a seepage failure mode. So seepage happens when small pathways develop inside of the berm's levee and water moves through. And so as you can kind of see in the picture there, as these pathways develop, the levee becomes weakened and then can collapse in on itself, again, causing a weak point where floodwaters can then further breach behind the levee. And seepage can be caused by tree roots. It can also be caused by other types of items that have either been embedded in the levee or built into the levee. This is the final type of failure mode. This is overtopping, and essentially overtopping failure happens if there is an event that is just simply larger than the design of the levee system, and it overtops the levee. So in this next part of the presentation, we'll cover the existing condition of the Lansing and Calumet City levees based upon inspections that the Corps completed in 2018 and again in 2019. Here's a summary of the conditions that we found. So again, as I mentioned, the levee is designed to the 1% annual chance event. However, the levees were constructed in the 1980s, and over time, natural settlement has just happened, and this has resulted in some low spots in sections of the levee. So there's actually a lower level of protection that we see than the 100-year event. Additionally, we did note some of the potential failure modes that I just covered. So we noted some seepage in the Calumet City levee. There's also a section of sheet pile wall in Calumet City that is rusted through, so it's not providing that level of protection that it was designed to. And then additionally, there's erosion on the riverside banks of the levee, and we see a lot of trees and vegetation and structural encroachments. So if one of these failure modes were to happen, there could be flooding and an event more frequent than that 1% annual event. These pictures here are of the Lansing levee. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of trees and woody vegetation growing on the levee. Again, if one of these were to fail, that could pull up a large amount of embankment material, creating that weak point. Additionally, we see some sections of the bank that have eroded. That could lead to the slope failure, as I mentioned. This is not, we don't think that this is a major contributor to risk. However, we do see it, and this is something that could be addressed through this project. And then finally, there are many structures that are located either next to the levee toe or flood wall or within a 15-foot buffer zone from that levee toe. And we call these structures encroachments. As I mentioned, the structural encroachments could create those small pathways underground that would allow water to move through and cause seepage. And then additionally, for the encroachments in the 15-foot levee zone, they can impede maintenance and access by the village or the city to make any necessary repairs to the levee. So for core projects, we require a 15-foot clear zone just to allow for that operation and maintenance of the levees. We have some pictures here that cover the existing condition of the Calumet City levee. So we see a lot of the same issues that we see in Lansing. They're very similar. However, there are some additional low spots in Calumet City. So actually, with existing conditions currently, the level of protection is below the 100-year event. For the eastern segment of the levee, we think that it could be overtopped anywhere between the 1% and 2% annual chance event. And the western segment of that levee could overtop anywhere between the 2% annual chance event and the 4% annual chance event. Like Lansing, there are many structures that are either in conflict directly with the levee toe or within that 15-foot clear zone, and that impedes maintenance and access. And then additionally, you'll see these pictures called out with the yellow text, so railroad ties and sandbags. There's some railroad ties and sandbags that are built into the levee, and this basically creates a pathway for water to move through and create that seepage failure. And then additionally, as I mentioned, there's a picture there of that rusted through sheet pile wall. So right now it's completely rusted through, so if there were to be a flood that would cause flood waters to raise to that level, it really wouldn't be providing any level of flood protection currently. And then additionally, there are some mechanical parts of the pump stations that could use maintenance or replacement in kind. In this next part of the presentation, we'll cover the options that the Corps of Engineers looked at in this feasibility study to reduce the flood risk with the Little Calumet River. We formulated plans with the goal of reducing economic damages and risk to life safety. Specifically, we're looking at reducing those economic damages and life safety risk associated with overbank flooding from the Little Calumet River. And another objective for our study was to not only reduce that risk, but to also improve community awareness and the local village and city's ability to respond to flood emergencies. So helping to allow for mitigation as well. We do have a few legal and policy constraints and considerations that we had to take into account for this study, and those are listed there on the slide. So as I mentioned, we're really limited by this study authority to looking at overbank flooding of the Little Calumet River. So we're not looking at ways to address any other types of flooding with this study. We also sought to avoid increasing flood stages in other areas of the Little Calumet River. Essentially, we don't want to induce flooding in other areas of the river, and we also don't want to increase flood stages because that would really impact the ability for the project to be permitted. So we formulated our plans with that in mind. And then finally, we looked at options that would avoid, minimize, or mitigate any potential negative environmental impacts. So we looked at things like threatened and endangered species and any impacts to wetland areas and how we could avoid those. This slide covers our plan formulation process and how we evaluate our plans. So the Corps is required to pick the plan that maximizes net benefits, and the benefit categories that we look at are life safety, economic damages, any impacts to neighborhoods or cultural resources or environmental resources, any impacts on the regional economy that may be generated through construction of the project. And in this case, we were able to formulate a plan that did have positive net benefits in all of these categories. Here we have the 3 types of plans that were considered. The first is the no action plan. So this is essentially our baseline condition. This is the existing condition of the levee. We assume for the no action plan, no change in conditions to the project, no additional repairs are made in the future. And then we use this plan to compare all of our other alternatives against to understand how and if we're making an impact and how much benefit can be provided by the project. And then the second type of plan that we consider is called non-structural. And Army Corps of Engineers policy requires that we look at non-structural plans during the feasibility study. So essentially what a non-structural measure or a non-structural plan consists of is measures that reduce the consequences of flooding, not the probability. So things like relocating structures or flood-proofing structures. And then the third type of plan is a structural plan. So in this case, we looked at levee rehabilitation measures. And this is a plan that would actually reduce the probability of flooding, not just target the consequences of flooding. And so in this case, some of the structural measures that we looked at included modifying or keeping the existing alignment. We looked at different elevations to which we could repair the levee to. Yeah, those essentially were the different types of structural alternatives. So we took all of those factors into account, and in comparing all of the different options against each other, the plan that we are recommending during this draft feasibility study is a levee rehabilitation with a modified section of flood wall. And in your handout, you'll see an overview of what the project would look like. So the system would keep its current alignment. However, there is a section of the existing Calumet City levee that we would swap in a short section of flood wall, and you'll see that called out in the diagram. Other elements of this plan include restoring the system to the the original design elevation, which is the 1% annual chance event or the 100-year flood. So we'd basically be fixing any low spots and making sure that the levee is a consistent elevation throughout the system. Another large component of the plan is clearing any unwanted woody vegetation with stems greater than ½ inch, and this would be to ensure that we are reducing risk from the tree failure mode. Additionally, we would be going through and repairing any of the eroded embankments or seepage areas, looking at repairing any of the existing gate and drainage systems that need to be repaired, and then also putting in new flood wall where there's currently failing flood wall. So especially the important point is that section of Calumet City where the flood wall is completely rusted through. Let's see. And then another component of the structural plan, we do have a non-structural element that is developing a flood warning and preparedness plan. So this would be done in part with the city and the village, so that after the project is complete, should we move forward with the project, that there is additional risk communication and good plans in place to respond in the event that there is a very large flood event and there needs to be a flood fight response. So in this plan, we do not have any full residential buyouts. We avoid any of those by swapping in this new section of flood wall in Calumet City on that western segment. And however, this plan would require the 15-foot maintenance easement along the entire length of the levee. And we'll talk more about that requirement in a few moments. So should this project be built, here's kind of a summary of the issues that would be addressed. So as I mentioned, we'd be getting the system back to that consistent elevation to provide consistent flood protection throughout the two communities. We would be minimizing the risk posed by those 3 failure modes there, the tree failure mode, the slope failure mode, and the seepage failure mode. With this plan, we avoid any major environmental impacts, so we don't have any issues with threatened or endangered species, and then we also do not impact any wetland areas, so we avoid the need for any wetland mitigation. Should this plan be put into construction and completed, we do not anticipate that flood insurance rates would be impacted, simply because we're only able to repair to the 100-year elevation without freeboard. There is a chance that with this project there could be some credits for the community rating system rating, but this would be something that would have to be coordinated between the village and the city and FEMA. And as I mentioned, no home buyouts are required, and we would be required to obtain, or the city and village would be required to obtain the 15-foot levee easement for access for operations and maintenance. And Lillian will cover more information about the easement in just a moment. So just before we wrap up this part of the presentation, we do want to touch on residual risk. So this is the risk that would remain even after the project is completed if we do move forward with a project. So as I mentioned, we would be recommending repair to the 1% annual chance event. So there's always the possibility that a storm larger than that could happen. And so there's always going to be some level of overtopping risk that will exist. However, upon completion of this project successfully, both levees would be entered into what we call the Public Law 8499 program. It doesn't have a very fancy or snazzy name, but essentially this program is very valuable because it allows the Army Corps to provide flood risk preparedness, response, and repair to the village of Lansing and city of Calumet City moving forward after completion of the project. So if there were to be a very large storm, the communities would be able to tap into this program and work with us for flood fighting assistance and any repairs or rehabilitation that may have to take place if the levee is damaged in the future. And then also, as I mentioned, another way that we're looking to further mitigate and reduce risk is by those flood warning and preparedness plans. So making sure that there is a good plan in place and that there's good risk communication happening with the residents. And then also the village of Lansing and city of Calumet City would be required to complete certain operations and maintenance activities as a condition of the project partnership agreement for this project. So there would be maintenance that would take place moving forward if the project is constructed. So with that, that concludes my section of the presentation, and I'm gonna pass it off to Lillian to cover real estate requirements.
Good evening. I'm Lillian Harris. I'm the realty specialist for this project, and I'll be speaking with you this evening about the real estate requirements for this project. So as you've heard already, the area surrounding the levee must remain clear of structures and woody vegetation. As we saw in Caitlin's presentation, woody vegetation can result in levee failure. For proper maintenance and operation of the levee, as well as for safety, the area within 15 feet of the levee must remain clear at all times. So if you are in your presentation on slide number 32, the image in this slide depicts an area within the levee footprint. If you can actually see the image, the green dashed lines illustrate the 15-foot clear zone, which is also the levee easement area. And again, that area must remain clear at all times. So that green area it represents the 15-foot clear zone, and the white line bordered in the black represents a visual representation of the levee. So the city of Calumet City and the village of Lansing will be required to obtain levee easements for the perimeter of the levee, including all land within 15 feet of the levee. So I just wanted to take a moment to explain a levee easement. A levee easement grants the city of Calumet City and or the village of Lansing the rights to use the property within that easement for the purposes including levee construction, operation, maintenance, and repair. At this point, the project is still in the feasibility phase and it has not yet been approved. With easements, the property owner retains the ownership rights and privileges, but must not interfere with the rights granted by the levee easement. So you might be familiar with other easements that you have for your property. Usually there are easements, utility easements for water, gas, electricity, things like that. So it would be pretty similar to that, with the difference being allowing the city and the village right to access the property for maintenance, operation, construction, and repair of the levee. So this slide just talks more about what you can expect with where we are in the project. Again, we're in the feasibility phase, but once the project is approved and funded, the city of Calumet City and the village of Lansing will contact property owners of land within the levee easement area to obtain easements. Then the process for doing that is regulated by the Uniform Act for Real Property Acquisition, also known as Public Law 91-646. So that process includes appraisal of the land by a licensed appraiser, an offer being made to the owner by the village or the city, and acceptance of that offer from the property, between the property owner and the city or the village. As Caitlin mentioned in her presentation, structures or vegetation within the levee easement area will also be removed to protect the integrity of the levee system. Landowner meetings for property owners will be scheduled in the future once the project has been approved. So again, right now we're in the feasibility phase, and once that phase is completed, then there'll be more to come for property owners, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ahmad, and he'll speak through the project phases and the schedule for the project.
My name is Imad Samara. I'm a project manager for U.S. Army Corps, and this is a project that actually kind of a little special for me because for many years I spent building the project to just east of here in Indiana. So I was always hoping that one day we can cross to Illinois and also repair those levees in Lansing, and I'm getting the chance to do that. So, so as Lillian mentioned, and I believe Caitlin also said, that we are in a feasibility phase. So we have to go additional steps for us to get to where we actually gonna be able to build something and get it done. So right now we are in public review phase, and that's will end in September 20th. What that means is there's also at the same time other reviews are being done. So once we get all the comments, once we address all these comments, then we actually go from a draft report to a final report. And we will actually work to approve the final report sometime by November 2021. So please give us your comments. This is definitely the time that we haven't finished everything, and things can still be tweaked to get the final report and the final approved tentatively selected plan so we can move into the next phase. So the next phase, basically, once we get approval for our report and there is a plan that has been approved, then what the next phase would be is for us to go to actually plans and specification and or development of plans and specification. But also before that, we have to actually get a project partnership agreement with Calumet City and with Village of Lansing to actually for us to move to the next phase. The next phase is going to be funded 65% of federal funds and 25% of non-federal funds, which is at this point will be the Village of Lansing and the city of Calumet City. Now, part of that 35%, did I say 25%? Sorry, it's 35 and 65. Part of that 35% is also for them to acquire all those lands. So that becomes part of that 35%. So we project that maybe by March we'll sign that agreement, and the first thing that we want to do is actually to finalize our real estate plans so they can actually we can actually request that they go and acquire lands, and we have to develop those plans. That we see this one to happen sometime in the real estate plan, by March of 2021. Sorry, we will actually get the approved plan. We are projecting that the approved partnership agreement will be in March. So from that point on, they can definitely start the acquisition, and we will actually develop those plans and give it to them by September of 2021. So by then, we will actually work with the village and the city to actually make sure that the acquisition process, before we start the acquisition process, we will have another meeting with the homeowners to make sure that they understand all the processes that is going to take place to get the easements that we need. It's going to take a long time for the village and the city actually to acquire those lands. We have to acquire all the land for us to actually build this project. So we think that, or we actually think that we're going to probably award a contract, or we're projecting to award a contract sometime maybe 3.5 years from the acquisition of this project. We will work with the city and the village to make sure that maybe we can do it faster if we can. But the way we have it is maybe it's going to take them about 3.5 years to acquire the land. So we're talking about awarding contract for construction sometime in August of 2026. Unless they can get that land sooner, then we can actually do this work sooner. That's basically what the schedule for us for this project. The next page is really important because it gives you the link for where the report is saved. So you can go in there and download that report or read that report. And there's 3 ways for you to provide us with comments. If you have comments now, you can give us those comments and we'll take them back with us and make sure to address them. You can email us, which is, since this is a NEPA process, it's our Jason Z. Zylka, which is jason.j.zylka, Z-Y-L-K-A, at usace.army.mil. You can email your question to Jason. Or you could mail your question. And the address is shown here. Attention, Jason, and 231 South LaSalle Street, Suite 1500, Chicago. And just make sure that your postmark is on the 20th of September. I'm not sure we're gonna reject it if it was 21st of September, but so. And that's it, I think, for me.